Hey everyone, Dr. Stillman here again with Jim Laird, and today we are going to be talking about hydration, including overhydration and dehydration, or underhydration. We're going to talk about everything that goes into your water, comes out of your water, what to put in your water, so on and so forth. Jim, where do you start with asking people questions about what they're drinking and why?
Well, I mean, the problem is that most people are so terrible that, and most people don't even, I saw a statistic the other day, like 65% of Americans don't drink water at all. They just drink nothing but sodas and juices. And
is it that bad?
Yeah, I think it was 60 or 70%.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and then alcohol. I mean, so when I meet with people, I usually start with like, let's try and drink more water and less soda and less, whatever else. And then, very few people do I need to get into any kind of, like some of my wrestlers and stuff that have to cut weight will get into stuff. But for most people, it's like, I mean, this is obviously very important, obviously, but most people would be dramatically, it would dramatically benefit them to drink less juice, to drink less, drinks you buy at the gas station, and start drinking more spring water. So that's usually where I start with people.
Yeah, and that's the first step for sure, because there's a lot of stuff that goes into what people are drinking that is, quite frankly, outright toxic. And then for some of them, it may not be toxic, but they may have, say, an immunological reaction to it or a sensitivity to it. And so they really need to avoid it. And that's one reason why, two people can drink the same drink. They have the same, basic human genome, and they get different reactions. So it's not just about, is this good for me? Is this bad for me? Or is this good for people? Is this bad for people? It may be bad for you, but okay for somebody else.
Let's add to that.
Yeah.
One, I don't know if we covered this in the beginning or not, but you are basically a giant science experiment, essentially. Okay.
Yeah.
And we basically look at our experience and what we've seen from what we've dealt with other people that sees what works for the majority of people.
Right.
Now, you probably can't live like Keith Richards and live to the age of Keith Richards, but Keith Richards can do it. Just because Keith Richards can do it doesn't mean you can. But the job is of yourself, and with our help, is for you to figure out the things you need to do to help you go in the right direction. And that could change a year from now. You could get a divorce, or you could lose your job, or you could be under a lot more stress, and all of a sudden things that never bothered you before do. So it's a matter of starting with a systematic habitual change, seeing what happens, and then playing around with all these different things. And obviously we want to get all the big rocks first before we start, doing any major interventions, right?
Yeah.
But I think you saying that is like, one person can get away with this and another person can't,
Absolutely.
Dennis Rodman used to do some really crazy stuff, like party all night in Vegas and then go play in a game, in a playoff game, and play like one of the best NBA players of all time. Most normal people can't do that. So, that's a really good thing to cover, because people think that, well, if I just do this, this, and this, I should be okay. Well, maybe for somebody else, but maybe not for you, unfortunately,
Right.
Or you might only have to do one or two things and everyone else has to do them all,
Right.
So,
yeah. Yeah. And so I see people coming in who are either not drinking enough water, or who are drinking a bunch of things they need to stop drinking. A couple cups of coffee in the morning, a couple cups of yerba mate here and there, a few cups of tea. Rarely is that the problem. Usually is large volumes of things. And lots of people think that what they're drinking is healthy. And sometimes that's true in a sense, but they may, for example, be using a lot of a certain, herbal tea. Let's say that herbal tea has licorice in it. Well, licorice can actually drive up your blood pressure. And it can radically change your urine output. And so people may need to actually stop using licorice tea, even though it's healthy, right? And so I get at this with a lot of different, questions. I ask people, how much are you drinking? What is it? I'm looking usually for some kind of daily water and other beverages intake of between 2 and 4 liters. You've got to tailor that to the amount of sweat that they're losing, the amount of exercise they're doing, breathing in, heavily during exercise. You'll have more dry air coming in, more water than leaving the body. Obviously, if you're hydrating a lot during exercise and then your blood pressure is pumping, you'll actually eliminate more urine, so you have to take more in. But somewhere in that window of 2 liters to 4 liters tends to keep people at optimal. What I see people doing on both sides of that is either underhydrating or overhydrating. The overhydration tends to be more an issue with the people who are coming to see me who are very health conscious. They've heard that drinking water is really important. You got to drink enough of it to detox and so on and so forth. And all that's true. But what people need to realize about hydration, and Tim Noakes lays this down in his book, Waterlogged, is that excessive water consumption will deplete your body of vital minerals. And I see this all the time in people who've been drinking overly filtered water. Their total body mineral status has been wrecked. And I get at this with a variety of different labs. You can look, for example, at a urinalysis specific gravity. When that specific gravity number is high, about 1.03, I think it is, 1.03 is the upper limit of normal. That means the urine's heavy. It has a lot of mineral or cellular content in it. And when it's really low, it's really close to the density of water. That means the body doesn't have a lot of minerals coming out in the urine. You're always going to lose minerals in your urine. It's part of life. That means you got to have the right minerals coming in. We get to this with diet, but we also get to it with the minerals in the water. So like when Jim says drink spring water has got a parts per million, and parts per million is the measurement of what we call total dissolved solids. So the amount of different minerals and other different elements that are dissolved in the water, not suspended. Like you can't throw dirt into a glass and make it cloudy, and that's not a suspension. So they're not dissolved, right? But dissolved is you can look through it, but there's solids suspended in it or dissolved in it. And that number for spring water tends to be between about 100 on the very low end up to about 300 parts per million. And that's really important because the quantity of mineral that delivers to the body is actually rather significant. You can get a significant dose of things like calcium, magnesium, sulfur, lithium from your water. And we see this playing out in the epidemiological literature in a really profound way. They've done some studies where they've found that hard water with, and that means water that's loaded with positively charged minerals like calcium, magnesium, and potassium. It's also got lots of other trace elements because these things never exist in some kind of vacuum. Because you have to remember that the way it's getting into the spring water is that the rain comes down, filters through the ground, then it gets into the aquifer. The pressure in the aquifer builds. It then comes up through layers of rock, stone, gravel, the Earth's crust, and then it comes out on the Earth. Under pressure, underground, it's getting minerals dissolved in it. And so that's the total dissolved solids and the minerals that you see in the water. This is why people want to drink things like Perrier or San Pellegrino or Mountain Valley spring water. They've got this wonderful flavor that's imparted by the minerals, right? I mean, the thing about salt, salt's a mineral. We add it to our food to make it taste better. We're just doing the same thing with mineral waters. And the calcium and magnesium are the two key or most common minerals in groundwater. Back in the day, they did some epidemiological research showing that the harder the water in an area, the lower the risk of death from certain key causes. That's been mixed over the years. My takeaway from reading that literature is that it's actually the magnesium in the water that seems to be making the biggest difference. And in my practice, I see a ton of magnesium deficiency, and magnesium deficiency across the board is associated with diseases of aging. Not everyone's deficient right now. When I say that, I mean not all of you need to take it. Some of you have actually had patients over the years who started taking magnesium or took too much magnesium and had actually some symptoms from that. But the key thing to understand is adding minerals to your water can be a recipe for success. So Jim, let's talk about minerals in water, because I think in your world, where I see this coming up a lot is people are using salt as their mineral of choice rather than, or as part of their remineralization solution, their electrolyte solution, rather than things like magnesium and potassium, like I tend to use in my practice. So what are your thoughts on electrolyte preparations and supplements?
Well, because I work with a lot of high school kids and normal folks, and we got to keep things as simple as possible. So basically, when I talk to somebody like a kid, I'm like, okay, so look at your pee. If it's crystal clear, you're drinking too much water. If it's dark yellow, you're not drinking enough water. And if it's somewhere in the middle, then you're drinking enough. So that's every time you pee, you can pretty much see, your hydration status.
I entirely agree.
So that's a really easy way. I don't really see people getting like too much salt. I see people being scared to death of salt. The only athletes I've really ever had to worry about, the problem is like a lot of these hydration drinks are so sugary, so when I work with like a basketball team, I would sneak in before the game and I would literally put this much Gatorade and that much water, so to water it down, because the Gatorade, they'd give them a Gatorade and it was so syrupy that it would get, and the same with like my wrestler guys, I would have them do like this much Pedialyte, that much water, because their electrolytes and everything are so messed up after they've cut weight and sauna and all that kind of stuff, that we would give them like this much Pedialyte, that much water, and that instead of the Gatorade, which is really heavy with a lot of sugar in it, and a lot of these, energy drinks, they taste really good. They're designed to taste good, and they throw all your electrolytes in imbalance, all over the place, So getting people to simplify, but I see the demonization of salt. I don't see with normal people that I work with are so scared to death of salt. They don't want to, they don't put it on anything.
Yeah. Let's talk about how important it is.
Oh, it's really important, but balance is the key, right? And that's why, getting back to nature and really for most people, like spring waters are going to be and for a lot of people, spring waters don't taste good, because they're so used to drinking things with artificial sweeteners but after a while, once you wean yourself off those, like to me, regular water, like tap water tastes horrible.
Tastes awful.
Like spring water, Perrier, San Pellegrino, like I like those.
Right.
So because my palate has changed. But, in the past when I was addicted to diet sodas, there's a certain taste that just makes you want to drink more of them, right? And the more dehydrated you get, you drink a Diet Coke or a Diet Mountain Dew, which my Diet Mountain Dew is my pleasure of choice. And you drink one and then you pee and you get thirstier and you drink another and you drink another and you drink another, right? And so, the majority of the people I see are pounding diet. They might be drinking diet because they think it's healthier and need to basically switch over to, some sort of mineral water type deal. That's basically what I've seen.
Yeah. So let's talk about salt and mineral balance, because, in nature, sodium's in everything. Very rarely does anyone run out of it, but it can be performance enhancing mineral. A lot of people out there are selling electrolyte solutions that are rich in salt, because the reality is that if you do take in more salt while you're exercising, you will be able to do more work. You'll have a higher overall blood pressure. It's because salt really activates the sympathetic nervous system. What you'll find across the board in the research is that when potassium intake drops relative to salt, you wind up with some really significant problems. It's one of the hallmarks of and the beginnings of all metabolic disease and dysfunction. You got to understand that magnesium and potassium are really balanced by calcium and sodium. That's one of the reasons why in the spring water literature, what you'll find is that the magnesium is what protects people from these diseases. The calcium doesn't seem to be playing as big of a role. Calcium and sodium are in so many different foods. Whether or not you absorb enough of it and keep enough of it is really more about, is your kidney working properly and is your gut working properly? But magnesium and potassium can very easily be depleted. The more stress you're under, the more these things are being eliminated from the body. There's really very little research on how stress affects balance of these minerals. But one example is sound stress. If you're exposed to 100 decibel sound for 4 hours, it doubles your urinary magnesium losses for about 2 days, which is a long time. And if you're constantly exposed to 100 decibel noises occupationally or recreationally, right? A lot of people listen to their music that loud. They watch a movie that loud. They're engaged in an industrial, capacity. And so there's a lot of loud noises going on. You really can lose a lot of these two minerals. Over time, if you don't make up for those losses, and one of the best ways to do it is in your water, you wind up with this chronic high sodium, high calcium state, low potassium, low magnesium state. Mag and potassium live, generally speaking, in your cells and very much in your bone structure, particularly the magnesium. And so you can gradually deplete the bank accounts in these tissues. This turns into things like osteoporosis, turns into things like high blood pressure, turns into things like chronic fatigue syndrome. Because while these two minerals will calm the body down by activating the parasympathetic nervous system, in opposition to the calcium and sodium that are activating the sympathetic nervous system. What will happen over time is that because they're necessary for energy generation within the cell can no longer make energy. And that leads to people feeling really tired. And again, this is why I like spring water. I also like remineralization solutions. The one that I use first is concentrates, which has kind of a bitter taste to it. And this is where people who want to get fancy can do things like buy a soda stream and then add minerals like potassium and magnesium to the water. And then if you put water with minerals in the soda stream and you pressurize them, you're basically mimicking what happens underground for those minerals to get into the water. Pressure will put minerals into solution. And so you can do it that way. If you're interested in that, there's tons of videos about how to remineralize your water on YouTube. I guide people through this when we get their labs, so we know whether they need more potassium, more magnesium, because there's a lot that plays into that. And I want to reiterate that it's not just the potassium, the magnesium, the sodium, and the calcium. It is also the other trace elements that go along with it, many of which we haven't studied in adequate detail. Like, for example, lithium is a common trace element in water in very, very tiny quantities. But the higher the lithium level in your drinking water, we've found epidemiologically the lower the risk of suicide in that community. Now, modern water treatment and particularly RO filters, Berkey filters, they're filtering out as much as possible. That includes the lithium. And this is why I like concentrates as well. There's a trace amount of lithium in concentrates, and most people coming to see me benefit from a little bit of very small doses of lithium in their water, I believe, as well as all the other trace elements that are in concentrates.
Isn't it interesting how nature has all this stuff kind of just built into the system?
Yeah,
you know?
right.
And the problem is we've gotten away from, processed foods and, of course, we've got wonderful people in power that want us eating meat designed in a lab and all sorts of cool stuff like that. But, the bottom line comes down to, you want to avoid stuff that's processed and man-made, and you want to try and eat as much natural food and natural, water as possible, and obviously there's going to be times where that is an inconvenience, right? Or you're not able to, and you just got to do the best you can. But it's interesting. All this stuff is kind of in balance. Like the spring water is made, almost perfectly. And, as man, we try and make things more convenient. We kind of screw it up, right? So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, my key things when I'm working with people and I want to make sure that their water status is corrected is, number one, it's got to be a high quality source. It can't be tap water. It also can't be just, we buy it in big, plastic jugs at the grocery store and cart them home. The big plastic jugs, I'm talking 5 gallons that they sell for like water dispensers that you'll often have at home or in an office, like the water coolers you see.
Yeah.
Those don't seem to put off enough plastic to poison people because they're very hard. They don't off-gas a lot of plastic, and they're being reused. So even if they were, those volatile plastics are being pulled out, and then the structure really solidifies. I've never seen anyone drinking out of those have a positive or abnormal toxin panel as a result of that. There's always something else in their exposure. Yeah. So those aren't as much of a problem from my perspective. If you want to get big plastic 5-gallon jugs of reverse osmosis filtered water that's got some minerals added back into it, and then add your own minerals back into it, that's one of the possible solutions. And then the other thing, obviously, being the soda stream. And then if you want to drink spring water, it's wonderful. It's certainly not going to hurt anybody, and it is going to have some of that magnesium that's necessary for your body, and the rest of the potassium that you really need and you can get from water, you can then get from food. And then when people want to use salt, I tell them to salt their food to taste, and I tell them to use salt if they are for performance enhancement in a reasonable way, and make sure that they're balancing it with their potassium intake, because many people don't realize how much potassium they're eating. They're eating 1, 2, 3 grams a day. That's not enough if your salt intake is 2, 3, 4, 5 grams. It'd be very hard for you to get to 5 grams of sodium, but with some of these very concentrated sodium solutions, you actually could do that and not realize it. And then with labs. I like your advice to not to have urine that's slightly colored, not too light, not too dark, because that's about the best way best thing you could go by during the day.
It's a constant gauge, right?
Constant gauge.
What are some foods that are high in potassium?
My three favorites are potatoes, tomatoes, and bananas. Foods that are often in the health and wellness world, labeled as poisons by a lot of influencers. And I think it's really unfair. Some people can't tolerate them. For many people, they're some of the most healing foods that I actually recommend. And then the high magnesium foods, it's pretty much anything that's green leafy vegetable or a nut or a seed. And there's some whole grains, like, for example, oats are loaded with magnesium, one of the highest magnesium foods you can eat. So again, it's a lot. It's all about balance. Like you said, you really can't, you need to have strike an equilibrium in the intakes of these different things. And this is one reason why I so strongly recommend that people at least go through a diet review with me, where we look at a week of their dietary data and chronometer, so that we have real numbers on how much potassium they're consuming, how much sodium they're consuming, what's their copper intake, what's their zinc intake, because we see a lot of patterns emerge in that then explain why they have the deficiencies that they have. And then we can come up with a strategy for preventing that in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that wraps up hydration. Any other thoughts, Jim?
Drink spring water.
Yeah, it's great stuff.
I mean, you get into the detail of this stuff, and that's the thing. There are people that need to get into the very nitty gritty of this, but when I actually talk to people, I've interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of people in the last 25 years.
Yeah.
And most people get all caught up in this minutia, and they haven't got the basics. They're not sleeping well, they're not managing stress, they're not eating a protein at every meal.
Right.
They're not drinking water consistently, and then they're worried about what supplement to take, and they've got all this stuff at the bottom. And if you do have all this stuff in line, and you're doing all this stuff, it's usually stress that's the problem. It's usually your workout is not being applied properly, or your job or whatever your life is causing the issues for you. So
yeah,
we're going to beat it over your head with a mallet that, keep it simple, get the foundational stuff done. And then if you still have problems, then you need, some fancy stuff. But most people don't even do the basics. And then they're looking for a magic bullet.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in the next talk, we are going to be tackling light therapy for performance and recovery. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you in the next episode.